Eine Mission for the USS Constitution. Chapter 5.
Tal said.
Captain Perry is hailing us.
David replied, on screen. George, you've finally caught up with us. What now? Captain Perry answered.
I have concluded that you are either a rogue or are being manipulated by someone in Navy headquarters. I just can't decide which.
David looked at the image of his former captain. George, take a second look at the imprisonment of my guests. How could this happen when they were on a naval installation? Where were the sensors and the safeguards that every naval installation is required to have by regulation? Who has the authority to close down security at our headquarters? My sensor lab watched as Admiral Stone was kidnapped. That's how we found and rescued them. Captain Perry responded.
What should we do?
David thought. We have Admiral Halloran's bio signed from when he was with us since our maiden voyage. It would be a slam dunk to trace him, George said.
It would be a slam dunk if you could get close enough.
David replied, we could get close enough with an escort. George asked.
Who could you get to escort you? I could not unless you were in chains.
David said, your best bet would be to be out of the quadrant. George responded.
In that case, you're on your own. I shall stay nearby but out of sight unless needed.
David replied, George, I just don't know what to think. Do you believe that we might be on the up and up? George replied.
David, I would think you are on the up and up before I could ever believe you're a traitor. But I know that this has to be your play. If there is any help you might need, just ask.
Admiral Sims and Keeler, Larry and David, and the rest of the bridge crew were stunned. Admiral Sims said,
Captain, do you believe him?
David replied, Admiral, I trust Captain George Perry implicitly. I'd trust him with my life, and I guess I am. After a little thought, David asked, Larry, how are our Hala wizards doing on our escort? Larry replied,
I'll go find out.
To which David replied, let's go together. Lieutenant Stevens, you have the con. Larry showed David to the escort lab. There they found 3 ensigns huddled around a computer console.
Gentlemen and lady, the captain wants to know how the escort project is going.
Ensigns Waters, Wong, and Nakamura turned and snapped to attention. David said, gentlemen and lady as you were. Where are you on your project? Ensign Waters smiled.
We were just about to run a test if you want to see, sir.
The other 2 were nodding enthusiastically. Finally, Larry ordered.
Show us.
Ensign Waters ordered.
Computer, run escort sequence 32.
On the view screen appeared 3 ships, with the names clearly displayed, the USS Enterprise, USS Defiant, and USS John Paul Jones. Then the holograms began to maneuver about. Then Ensign Nakamura called the sensor lab.
Commander Sims, our hologram ships are out there.
They heard Dale's voice.
The sensors are picking them up. There's a Defender class, a John Paul Jones class, and a Constitution class ship on the screen.
David called, Dale, are the sensor readings true? Dale's voice came back.
Yes, sir. Within 0.006%. No one will ever know the difference.
David clapped the backs of the 3 young officers. Gentlemen and lady, that's damn good work. Now save that in at least 3 files. And I have another challenge for you. We have to have the transponder signatures of all 3 of those ships to be transmitted as well. So, I leave this to you 3. Consult with Captain O'Reilly, Communications Chief Jensen, anybody. You have 3 days. Larry shook their hands.
I'll be checking up on you as things progress.
Then David and Larry returned to the bridge. David called the sensor lab. Dale, I want to be able to locate and teleport our 4 targets in a matter of moments. Get the bio signs loaded and be ready on command. Okay? Dale responded.
Okay.
Then David called O'Reilly. O'Reilly, I want to be able to teleport our 4 targets quickly, but we may have to teleport around shields. Be ready. O'Reilly replied.
Aye, aye, sir.
David turned to Larry. I want the crew to be ready. We will strike at 00 hours Pacific Standard Time in 3 days. Larry smiled his most evil grin and said,
Tal, shipwide please.
He ordered the crew to rest, pray, and prepare for the upcoming exercise.
All hands on deck.
Now they only had to wait. Ensign Wong called David.
Captain, everything is ready. Give us the order.
And we believe we can create escort to perfection.
David replied, on my mark. Tall, ship wide, please. Now hear this, this is the captain. Operation Rescue begins now. Execute. Suddenly the Constitution was surrounded by the 3 escort ships, the transponders began to transmit, and Captain George Perry's voice requested clearance to deliver the Constitution to naval security. Commander Sims found the 4 targets in the sensor lab, including Sherry, Admiral Holloran's wife. Then he sent that information to teleporter crewman O'Reilly. The 4 targets were teleported to the Constitution, where Admiral Keeler, Ambassador Stein, and Captain Stevens waited. As the targets appeared on the teleporter dais, David ordered, execute escape plan 2. And the Constitution and the 3 escort ships disappeared. As Admiral York watched, he was astonished.
I underestimated Stevens and his crew. I had better disappear myself.
As he rose from his desk, 4 naval security officers stepped into the office.
Admiral York, you're under arrest. Hands behind your back, please.
Admiral York asked.
Under whose authority?
The officer in charge replied.
Fleet Admiral Holloran, sir.
Defeated, Admiral York submitted to the officers and was led away. Admiral Holloran stood on the bridge of the USS Constitution and faced David, Admirals Keeler, Sims, and Ambassador Stein.
David, that was spectacular. Thank you, the United System owes you and your crew a debt of gratitude. Well, all of you, Jim, Susan, Wally. That operation will go down in naval history.
David smiled. Admiral, I want you to meet 3 ensigns that did most of the work to give us the escort we needed. This is Ensign Waters, Ensign Wong, and Ensign Nakamura. Admiral Holloran shook their hands, uttering aloud.
Thank you, gentlemen and lady. Rest assured that this will be placed in your records and considered for early promotion.
David asked Admiral Holloran, well, what now, sir? The Admiral replied.
David, we've just started. Admiral York was just a pawn. We need to dig out the real culprits, person, or persons unknown high in the system government.
Admiral Keeler asked.
Tim, who's going to be the Chief of Naval Operations?
Admiral Holloran replied.
I have imposed upon Admiral Marovich to come out of retirement and assume the Navy's reins again. We all know the stature of that man.
Admirals Keeler and Sims nodded enthusiastically, and the entire bridge crew and the guests on the bridge whispered an amen. Tall said,
Admiral Holloran, Admiral Marovich.
To which Admiral Holloran replied,
On screen.
They're on screen, Admiral Marovich said in his heavy Russian accent.
Captain Stevens, I see that you have saved the day once again. Thank you. Now you all have the mission to negotiate a treaty with the Krill Empire. Tim, I want you here with me. Okay?
Admiral Holloran replied.
Okay, I'll teleport down this evening. For now, I want to have dinner with my friends up here.
At dinner, Admiral Holloran told the group that Admiral Stone would still spearhead the effort, Admiral Keeler and Ambassador Stein would be the negotiators, and that the USS Constitution would be to provide the accommodations for the negotiations. Admiral Stone told Admiral Holloran that she was now Admiral Sims, and her husband was Commander Sims. That Dale was the man who traced her and the negotiators and rescued the 3. Admiral Holloran remarked.
Good. Admiral Sims, you will still lead this effort. And congratulations.
Admiral Holloran returned to Earth, and Admiral Sims directed David to head for Krill Space. Again, David ordered a halt at 10 kilometers outside Krill Space and ordered Commander Sims to scan the area before taking any other measures. After an hour, a Krill battle cruiser appeared and announced the Krill negotiators were on board. Admiral Sims greeted the negotiators and asked them to teleport to the Constitution to begin the treaty negotiations. Admiral Sims, Keeler, Ambassador Stein, and David awaited the Krill representatives in the teleporter room as the teleporter began to hum. As the figures coalesced, what they saw startled them. 2 creatures looking like insects standing on the 4 rear legs, 2 sets of multiple eyes and mandibles formed their faces, 2 pairs of wings, and an armored thorax. Ambassador Stein stepped forward and saluted the 2 Krill representatives.
Gentle creatures. Welcome.
There was a buzzing and then what seemed to be a human male voice.
Thank you for your courteous welcome. I am...
There was a deep buzz, and the voice said,
Carter.
As the taller creature indicated himself.
And my companion is.
And a contralto buzz.
Shiela.
As the smaller one indicated itself. Admiral Sims introduced the group in the teleporter room. Then David indicated that they should then show their guests their quarters in the conference room. David directed the computer to begin to establish a language database for the universal translator for the Krill language. Carter spoke in the human male voice.
That is not really necessary as our translators are more than adequate.
David replied, I appreciate that, but as the language base in our computer grows, the transition for newer languages becomes simpler and faster. Carter remarked.
Oh, I see. We will be glad to oblige your efforts.
Admiral Sims replied.
Thank you.
As they arrived at the VIP suites, David asked, Are there any special amenities you would require for your comfort? Carter replied.
Only water and the supplies that are aboard our ship, which I shall retrieve shortly, with your permission.
David replied, With your permission, I'll have my security chief and one other security crewman accompany you to your ship. Carter dipped his head.
That is acceptable.
David said, At your convenience, Carter. After all the courtesies were taken care of, the negotiators convened in the conference room and began talks in earnest. Admiral Sims ordered David to begin sailing around to evade those who would attempt to sabotage the treaty efforts. David ordered, Hank, Proxima 3. Helm, UL5. We are on yellow alert. Suddenly, the attack klaxon began to sound, the bridge lights went out, and the red lights came on, and Commander Sims' voice boomed.
Red alert! We are under attack by 3 Krill battle cruisers.
On the view screen appeared 3 Krill battle cruisers maneuvering to surround the Constitution. David ordered, Roll to port. Lasers, take the ship on our port side. Torpedoes, a broad spread. Fire. The lasers raked the one ship, leaving minor damage. The torpedoes, however, stopped 2 of the battle cruisers. Like any uneven fight with bullies, when some of the bullies are beaten, the remaining bullies run. The one battle cruiser ran, leaving the 2 crippled ships at the Constitution's mercy. David ordered the Constitution to approach the crippled ships, and both ships exploded in a firestorm. David ordered, Hank, navigate to the Lagoon Nebula. Helm, UL-16, please. Admiral Sims questioned.
The Lagoon Nebula?
David answered, It's a gas nebula, and we might be able to hide and rest a while. At shift change, Commander Carson and his crew arrived, were briefed, and Day Watch took off for other pursuits. David went to the ship's preschool and picked up his son and his little princess. When he got to the preschool, little Davy ran and jumped into his arms, and David swung him up onto his shoulders and picked up Guinea, and they went down to their cabin. Stella had dinner ready for them and told them to go wash up. The little family ate, played, and read little Davy's favorite story, And to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street, by Dr. Seuss, as Ginny rested on her father's lap. Susan and Dale retired to their cabin and spent the evening not thinking. Not thinking about the mission, the saboteurs, or even their rank. Instead, they talked about their future as a family. During their stay in the Lagoon Nebula, the negotiations continued for about 12 hours a day. The main point of contention was the listening posts both sides wished to employ to watch the other party. Not necessarily the possible existence of the need for such a precaution, but the appearance of mistrust, and the idea of a military presence in the other party's space. Both sides understood the need for such a precaution since it had only been a few years since the two sides had been at war, unrestricted war. Another issue brought up by both sides was the existence of the opposition to a treaty by elements of both sides. Negotiations continued for days, and David chose to move out of the nebula and establish an orbit around the Krill homeworld. After several hours in orbit around the Krill homeworld, Carter approached David.
Captain, this, we have been informed, is a very dangerous orbit. If the renegades approach, our government will not attempt to protect you, us.
David asked. They would not even try to protect you? Carter replied.
No, they are cowards. Although they desire treaty, they will not step in to stop those opposed to it.
David said, then, we will keep moving around. I plan to move around space at random to try and avoid any conflict. But, that being said, if we are attacked, we will defend ourselves first and ask questions afterward. Then David ordered Hank to navigate to Sector 00 and establish an orbit around Earth. Carter asked,
why Earth? Are not the affections on your world like those on our world?
David replied, those high up in the Navy are adamantly pro-treaty. So much so, they have arrested a high-ranking officer opposed to this treaty. Carter returned to the negotiation table. but Shiela asked to take a break and possibly talk with a female crewman. Admiral Sims thought that, perhaps, she and Stella could chat with Shiela. Later, David learned of the two Navy officers' talk with the Krill female, and they related that the female Krill was patient, kind, courteous, peace-loving, and bonded with Carter, the male Krill negotiator. After that, the work for the treaty continued in the same manner as before. Admiral Marovich contacted the ship and asked about what progress had been made. Admiral Keeler related their sticking point, and Admiral Marovich said that he and Admiral Halloran would consider the question and contact him later if they had a suggestion. Meanwhile, Admirals Marovich and Halloran continued their investigation into who had initiated the kidnappings of the two admirals and the ambassador. David had been talking to Admiral Halloran about their investigation. As he watched the videos of an ancient detective TV series, one character was talking to the main detective.
Always follow the money.
So David jumped up and ordered the computer to send a burst message to Admiral Halloran. Admiral, follow the money. Who would profit most if our treaty efforts failed? Who would lose the most if the treaty was a success? David. 10 minutes later, David received a reply from Admiral Halloran.
David, where did that come from? We had never considered such a motive. Admiral Marovich was stunned, as was I. We have naval security working on that now. Admiral Marovich told me to tell you.
Oh, Magoo! You've done it again!
I think he's been looking into things you might be familiar with from your time. Like the old cartoon character, Mr. Magoo.
David laughed. That could make future discussions with the good Admiral very interesting. Admiral Halloran asked.
Where did that idea come from, David?
David replied, I was watching an old 21st century Canadian TV show, Murdoch Mysteries. The detective was William Murdoch and told his inspector, Inspector Brackenreed, his progress, and the inspector told him to follow the money, which makes a whole lot of sense.
What's my motto, Murdoch?
You have several, sir. All gems.
No. Those are aphorisms. I only have one motto, and that's follow the money.
After 2 days, David ordered, Hank, set course for Deneva 6, helm UL-10. Execute. As the Constitution began to leave the sector, 2 Defender-class ships challenged them, hold Constitution, Captains Wiley and Jerome of the USS Defiant and the USS Halsey, surrender or be destroyed. David ordered, computer, burst transmission to Admiral Halloran, confronted by the USS Defiant and Halsey. Please advise. Within seconds, the computer responded, David, the Defiant, and Halsey are not in this sector. Maybe disguised rogue ships. Captains Wiley and Jerome have reported from the Jovian sector. Halloran. David ordered, red alert. Battle stations. The red lights replaced the lights on the bridge, and the crew reported ready. David ordered, lasers. Quantum torpedoes, fire. The 2 ships turned and ran. David ordered, Hank, pick one of those ships and chase it down. Hank replied,
Gladly, sir.
It was a short chase, the Constitution being the fastest ship in human history.